All right, let's dive into Newcastle, Ireland. We're looking at how its rise as a tourist destination has, well, kind of left its mark on the coastline.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, really, and we've got this 1996 paper by Dr. Fatima Navas to guide us.
It really digs into how the city's grown and changed, right? And how all that human activity, sometimes has unexpected effects on the environment.
Absolutely. Like sometimes things happen that you just don't anticipate, and Dr. Navas really lays that out. It's not just about like random changes or natural processes, but how people interact with the environment, especially in a place that becomes a hot spot for, well, fun and relaxation.
Makes sense. So, like, set the scene for us. What made Newcastle such a draw for tourists in the first place?
Okay, so picture this. You've got the Mourne Mountains,
Oh, wow, impressive.
right? These huge granite peaks, and then like sweeping down to Dundrum Bay on the Irish Sea.
Oh, I see.
And nearby, the Merlot National Nature Reserve, famous for like its dune system. So mountains, sea, nature, all right there.
That's a pretty potent combination, especially for, I imagine, people in Belfast wanting to get away.
Exactly. It was a magnet for visitors. But, and this is important, it wasn't just the scenery.
Yeah, the paper mentions hiking, sailing, golf, all shaping the town's development.
Right, so those activities weren't happening in a vacuum. Think of it this way. More people come to hike, to sail. The town needs more places for them to stay, to eat.
Restaurants, hotels, all that.
Exactly, and all of that fuels the town's growth.
Like one thing leads to another.
It is, yeah, a feedback loop, you could say. But here's the thing, the growth wasn't spread out evenly.
Ah, because of the Mourne Mountains.
You got it. They acted like a barrier, pushing expansion northward along the coastline, which, as Dr. Navasconcha points out, would have, well, significant consequences.
So we've got this picture of Newcastle growing right along the coast. But then there's this turning point in the early 20th century when the beachfront becomes the place to be.
Ah, yes.
Grand hotels pop up, like the Sleeve Tenard Hotel,
Oh, yeah.
and then the Royal County Down Golf Links.
Now that sounds glamorous.
It does, right? But I'm guessing, reading between the lines of the paper, it wasn't all, perfect.
Well, they certainly put Newcastle on the map as like this high-end destination,
Right, but
but they also started encroaching on the existing dunes and beaches, which understandably led to some concerns about the impact on the environment.
yeah, you've got this beautiful natural environment that's drawing people in, but then you have to figure out how to manage all those people.
It's that classic dilemma, how to balance, the good that tourism brings with protecting the very thing that makes a place attractive to begin with.
Absolutely. And then the paper throws in another twist, the rise of caravan parks in the 1970s.
Oh, right, yeah.
A much more affordable option.
Yeah, a completely different type of accommodation, and it really took off.
So what did these caravan parks do to Newcastle's development?
They expanded the town, really pushed things outward.
I see.
But there was a tension, right? Because while they, provided more people access to Newcastle's beauty, they also kind of changed the look of the town, especially on the outskirts.
Especially compared to like those fancy hotels and golf courses.
Exactly. And it all kind of highlights this push and pull between development and preserving the character of the town. And then there's the coastline. It wasn't like humans just suddenly started impacting it.
It had been going on for a while, right? Even before the big hotels and caravan parks.
Way before. The paper mentions early interventions going back to the 19th century. Things like piers built for fishing, all sorts of structures along the water.
So like little changes here and there.
Yeah, and they all had an impact, but then as the town grew, the small interventions weren't enough. They needed more robust coastal protection.
More serious measures to keep the coast from eroding and all that.
Exactly, especially around the newly developed areas like that promenade and, of course, the Sleeve Tenard Hotel, right on the edge of the sea.
You can't have your fancy hotel falling into the ocean.
Well, that's one way to put it, but it really does show how, as human activity ramped up, so did the need to manage and protect the coastline. It was like a sign of things to come.
And speaking of managing the coastline, there's this big project in the 1980s, a whole new promenade.
Oh, yeah, a major undertaking.
Tell me about it.
So they reclaim land from the sea, build this striking semicircular structure, the Newcastle Center, and they, further channel the Shimna River.
Wow. So they're really reshaping the seafront
A
here.
huge transformation, visually at least. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, there was a downside.
Yeah, I have a feeling this is where those unintended consequences come in.
You got it. Dr. Navas found that, while impressive to look at, that new promenade, especially the Newcastle Center, actually changed the wave patterns.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it led to increased erosion in nearby areas that aren't as protected.
So they tried to improve the seafront, and it actually ended up harming parts of the coast.
It's a classic example of how, even with good intentions, you have to really understand the interconnectedness of these ecosystems. You can't just focus on what looks good. You got to think long term.
A real lesson learned, for sure. And probably something other coastal towns can learn from, right? Not just Newcastle.
Absolutely. This isn't just a Newcastle story, it's a story that's playing out all around the world. Yeah, it's a reminder that we can't ignore the economic benefits of tourism either. Those jobs, that revenue, it's vital for places like Newcastle.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
It is, and that's what Dr. Navas gets at. It's not about stopping development altogether. It's about doing it, well, smarter, more sustainably.
Thinking ahead, planning for the long term.
Exactly, and making some, sometimes tough decisions about what's right for a particular area.
Right. The paper does mention some efforts to address the environmental side of things, like the National Trust managing that Merlot Nature Reserve. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
The National Trust, they've been working to protect those dunes at Merlot since like the 1960s.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. They've got this delicate balance to maintain, right? Protecting this fragile ecosystem, but also allowing people to, experience it.
So it's not just about keeping people out altogether?
No, it's about finding ways for people and nature to coexist. And that makes me think about all those caravan parks we were talking about.
Yeah, okay, I see where you're going with this.
Is there a way to design and manage them, so they blend in better, have less of a visual impact?
More in harmony with the surroundings.
Right. And that speaks to a bigger point Dr. Navas raises, the importance of design. It's not just what you build, but how you build it.
Using materials that fit in with the natural environment.
Yeah, things like that, incorporating green spaces. Can we create places that are beautiful and good for the environment?
It's that balance again. And it makes me think about those early interventions, too. The piers, the fishing structures, all that. Any lessons to be learned from those, even though they were much smaller scale?
Oh, definitely. One big takeaway is, understanding how little things add up over time. Each pier, each structure, it changed the way the water flowed, even if it was just a little bit.
But those little changes add up.
They do. Over time, they can have a big effect on the environment. It's like a ripple effect. You throw a pebble in the water, and you might not see the ripples right away, but they eventually reach the shore.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's why it's so important to think about the long-term consequences of, well, anything we do on the coast. We have to think about how our actions today might impact the coastline 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
I'm curious, what does Newcastle look like today? Has the town be able to find that balance?
I wish I knew. This paper's from 1996, so it's, a snapshot in time. We'd need to look at more recent research to see how things have played out.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to see what they've learned, what solutions they've come up with.
Maybe they've found some really innovative ways to manage tourism, protect the coast. Who knows? They might be facing new challenges that weren't even on the radar back then.
Climate change, sea level rise, all that.
Right. So yeah, Dr. Navaskance's work is a starting point, but it's just one chapter in, a much bigger story.
It's made me think about all those other coastal towns all over the world facing similar issues.
It is a global issue, and it's becoming more and more urgent, right? As the climate changes, those challenges are only going to intensify. It's a conversation we need to be having globally.
So where do we start if we want to be part of that conversation?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, right? Learning about the challenges.
And then taking action, whether it's supporting sustainable tourism, pushing for responsible development, making changes in our own lives.
Exactly. And all those individual actions can add up. If enough people start demanding change, well, that's how you create real momentum.
It's not just about Newcastle, then, this deep dive into, one town story. It's a springboard for thinking about these much bigger issues.
It is, yeah. And I bet Dr. Navas would be thrilled about that. Her work wasn't just about the past. It was about using the past to understand the present, and make a better future.
It's amazing how, one paper can get us thinking about so much.
I know, right? It shows how research can do more than just, tell us about the past. It helps us make sense of what's happening now and even what might happen in the future. Dr. Navas work, yeah, it was about Newcastle, but those issues, tourism, development, sustainability, those are everywhere.
She gave us this lens to see not just Newcastle, but all those other coastal towns dealing with the same stuff.
Exactly. And that's why this has been such an interesting conversation. It's not just facts and figures, it's about wrestling with these tough questions, looking at things from different angles, trying to figure out how to, make things better.
For both people and the planet.
Right. So for anyone listening who's, thinking, okay, what can I do? Where would you point them?
That's a good question.
I'd say start local. What's happening in your own community? Are there, coastal areas that are struggling? Are there groups working on protecting the environment, making development more sustainable? You might be surprised what you find.
That's great advice. starting local. It's like we don't have to wait for someone else to fix things.
Exactly. We can all be part of the solution, even if it's just, small things.
And those small things add up. Supporting businesses that are doing things the right way, volunteering, being more mindful of like how much we consume, all of that makes a difference.
Absolutely. Every little bit counts.
It feels like we've come full circle. We started with Newcastle and now we're talking about all these bigger ideas.
That's what I love about, really digging into a topic. You start somewhere specific, but it can take you to some pretty unexpected places.
And all that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Newcastle's urban development.
It's been great, exploring all this with you.
Thanks for joining me and for sharing, all your insights, and always inspiring to hear from someone who's so passionate about, well, making a difference.
Oh, the passion is definitely there. And I think that's what we need, right? Knowledge, curiosity, and that commitment to, well, creating a better world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Ah,
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new, maybe got a fresh perspective, and, maybe even feel inspired to take action yourselves. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.